Hi, everyone. I am Kelly Steibel-Clark. I am the manager of musical theater programs for wHARTon's Institute for Arts and Creativity. And today's wHARTon at Home Connection interview, I am very happy to be joined by our good friend, Broadway's Paul Canaan. Hi, Paul. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Hello, hello.
I'm doing great, thanks. And we are thrilled to have with us today Tony Award winner, director, and choreographer, Jerry Mitchell. Jerry, thank you so much for joining on today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So where are you right now? You guys are both out east. I know that we're having big snowstorms.
I'm in New York on 55th.
And I am at my house out on Fire Island, which is in Long Island, just outside of the city. And there's tons of snow here. So I feel like I'm in Michigan.
Exactly. We actually don't have as much snow as you guys do out east right now. So we're doing all right.
You guys, I don't know if you get as much snow as we get a lot of snow in Paw because we're so close to the lake and we get the lake effect, coming over the lake. So we get slammed in Paw.
Absolutely. So that being said, you're from Michigan, a Michigander yourself, from the West Coast there over by Lake Michigan. Tell us a little bit about how you got your start here in Michigan in the arts.
Well, I grew up in a teeny tiny town, Paw. Maybe some of you know it, but we had a community theater, Paw Village Players, and there was a dance studio, Meath Dance Studio. And when I was 10, I got swept up into both of them. And I basically lived, if I wasn't on the football field or on the basketball court or in the track field, I was in the theater or in dance class. And that was pretty much my life for 17 years. Well, from 10 to 17. Then I joined up with the Young Americans and I went on a national tour who have their summer home in Petoskey. I went on a national tour of West Side Story my senior year in high school. I also apprenticed at the Hope Summer Repertory Theater in Holland, Michigan, which has a wonderful summer program. And I did a lot of theater in the area, southwestern Michigan, as a kid. And then I went to Webster College, Webster University for 2 years in the conservatory program, joined the national tour of a chorus line, which brought me to New York City in my first Broadway show, Brigadoon for Agnes DeMille. And then I just did what everybody does, just, as Paul will say, I was a gypsy, which was the word at the time. I was a Broadway performer, and I went from show to show to show to show to show.
And now what made you make the switch from performing to the other side of the table on the creative side with the choreography and directing?
I really was always a choreographer. Even back in Michigan, I would choreograph at the Village Players. I would choreograph for the high school band. I would choreograph for the Pom Pom Girls. Mm-hmm. I would choreograph the school musicals, and same thing in college. And then I'm not the first dancer, choreographer, director. I mean, I'm following in the footsteps of Jerry Robbins, Michael Bennett, Susan Stroman. I mean, so many before me. And basically, I always had that eye for the entire production, not just the part I was playing. And so I ended up assisting being an associate to a lot of those people. Michael Bennett, who did a chorus line in Dreamgirls, Jerry Robbins, Agnes DeMille. I mean, some of the really heavyweights. Mm-hmm. And then I got my first shot at being a choreographer, on Broadway. And then I just never looked back. And then after 10 Broadway shows as a choreographer, I got my first shot as a director choreographer with Legally Blonde. And that just took me to the next level. And now I've been doing that and producing mm-hmm. part of it.
Yeah, and so you're behind most of the contemporary musical theater greats. I mean, like you said, Hairspray, Legally Blonde, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Kinky Boots, all of these show after show after show, which, we love. Yes, I see Paul pointing to his Kinky Boots. Those shows that we love is kind of this contemporary musical theater, musical comedy, like the who's who of what's popular on Broadway over the last few years. And I know a lot of those shows involve Paul Canaan. So Paul, how did you and Jerry get hooked up and working together?
Well, I remember actually the first time, he probably doesn't remember this, but I auditioned for Hairspray because when I saw Hairspray as an audience member, I was like, this is the most fun show on Broadway right now. I had such a blast and I was obsessed. And I went to this audition, and this tall choreographer with all the energy that the show had was like, we are going to dance full out. There was a live drummer, and the music was just like kicking. And he was like, do this combination, leave nothing behind, give it all you got. And it was just the most fun audition I'd ever been to in New York. I was like, what a fun. And I left with just this high. I was like, that guy was so fun. The audition was so fun. The show's so perfect. I was just floating. And then I just gone into Thoroughly Modern Millie, and the casting director, Craig Burns, called that they had a little vacation swing open in Hairspray. And I was so disappointed that I was like, I literally started a week ago and they just built costumes. I can't go into Hairspray right now. But right after Thoroughly Modern Millie, I auditioned for La Cage that he was choreographing. And I was terrified because I'd never worn heels or put on makeup and played a drag queen. And they asked us to flip and to try putting makeup on. And the girls at Thoroughly Modern Millie taught me how to put makeup on a little bit, did my best. And then we did La Cage together, and I got the show. And in the room, I think our friendship
didn't you wear a pair of periwinkle shoes with like rhinestones on them or something?
I wore Meredith Vieira came into Thoroughly Modern Millie for like a promo show thing, and they were like, no, none of the girls fit these big shoes. Paul, try these on. They all were like backing me to go into La Cage. And Dixie Carter, she said, oh, that's a good show for you. You got a nice tushy. You'll fit into that show well. But I had Meredith Vieira's like purpley rhinestone heels. So
they were
funny.
Periwinkle blue.
Yeah.
I remember them.
Yeah, I think I painted them a different color, and now we all share heels. But I think in the room, I just felt always like Jerry was this person that I would have been just best friends with when we were in junior high together. We both had this kind of theater energy about us. He listened to my ideas because I'm just kind of the loudest one in the room and he has no choice. And I just felt so comfortable kind of collaborating with him. And I've done workshops, and my favorite thing is to be in the room with him and just create ideas.
Paul has this incredible energy that is something I look for in everyone that I get a chance to work with. And it's like my energy, you know, it's a positive, it's a anything goes kind of energy. And when we were doing La Cage, also Paul is like a world-class gymnast. And at that time, of course, he could do anything I asked him to do. And I had this idea, there's a can in La Cage, and I had this idea that I wanted to do a lot of acrobatic stuff. And I really wanted it to be boisterous. And I ended up throwing dancers. We had a passerelle. A passerelle is like a runway in front of the stage, and the orchestra is between the passerelle and the audience, their proper stage. And so you can parade on it. And I ended up throwing the Cagelles over the orchestra pit and made them land in the splits on the passerelle. And it was in the can. And I just remember it being so fun and so like, oh my God. Even to me, I thought, can we do this? Paul said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And so two guys would take him by the arms and throw him, and he'd land in the splits. And it just became something, it was a very, very physical, demanding show for the Cagelles because they were dancing their heinies off. Those tushes were definitely being worked.
And that was Jerry Mitchell's first Tony Award for Best Choreography, which was so well deserved. And that show was the ultimate like dance show of my career ever.
I mean, they were tap dancing, they were kicking, they had amazing clothes, amazing outfits. They were doing aerial work. It was crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah, I would do tumble, 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 fly over the pit, slam into the splits, and then hook up into a rope that flew me above the stage, and they'd spin and spin, and I would spin and spin. I saw stars every night at the end of La Cage. But such a blast. And that's someone like Jerry as a director, you trust with anything. So of course I'm going to say yes to everything because I'm on the journey with him. And then following
through that entire process, you know, I became very, very close with Paul and with Charlie and with Nathan and others in the show. And so when I got to the next stage of directing and choreographing, I tend to go back to the people who I can trust to be in the room and help me deliver my ideas. So I was then asked to do Legally Blonde, and it was my first time as a director choreographer. And I cast Paul right away because I just thought, yeah, I want that energy in the room. I want that person with me. And the same thing when we did Kinky Boots, you know, the creation of the whole treadmill number and having Charlie there and Nathan and Paul all through the pre-production, who were basically doing anything I asked them to do. And we did some crazy, crazy stuff. The treadmill was very dangerous when it was first created because there were no bars, and it would jerk you, and we would fall off of it and land on it. It was crazy, and a real process developing that number in Kinky Boots. So yeah.
That was the year. I mean, that was such a beautiful moment of storytelling too, because the treadmill started as this big production number with the angels that were going to be us in heels, just making this kind of spectacular choreography number happen. But when we saw that the factory workers could walk on the treadmill in a more simple way, but Jerry set, you know, some counts of choreography that they all did, and it was actually more than we initially thought. We were like, oh, we don't need the story is these factory workers and their process and their sudden change of where they're going, instead of us continuing to show off and stuff, which I loved because it.
Paul was also somebody who I trusted his work ethic in the room, and what he had to say I valued, as I do everyone in the room. But because of the relationship and the shows and the work we've done together, I don't often seek approval or expect approval from the people who are working with me, because they're in the show and they can't see what's happening. That's the job of the director and choreographer, to look at the picture and then continue to shape it until you get the right picture. But I will never forget, we were doing the Everybody Say Yeah, the treadmill number in Kinky Boots, and Paul had a dentist appointment, I think, and he had to leave the rehearsal. And he left the rehearsal and he came back to the rehearsal room, and I was running that number, and we just finished like teaching it or putting it on its feet, and he got to watch the number. He wasn't in it, he actually got to watch it, and he came up to me and said, you know, basically, thumbs up, this is fucking amazing. And I will never forget that, because I thought, you know, it's nice to hear it from somebody who I trust, because we had a longer section in it at one point and I cut it out. I made it work for me, right? And the producers kept asking me to lengthen it and make it longer. And I said, no. I said, no, it's a magic act. And if I show my magic trick, they're going to figure it out. I want the number to happen and be over before anybody knows what the hell happened.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that was such a great number. I mean, I saw Kinky Boots on the tour when it came through a few years ago, but I mean, I have to say that was probably the most fun I've had at the theater, was seeing Kinky Boots. Just the energy and the life, you know, that's in every single number of that show. So that it's a real testament. But I love hearing about the relationship building, and the idea that, you know, you go back to the people you trust because the work they put in. We have a lot of students that watch these interviews, and so I think that's something to keep in mind for young people as they start in their careers.
I think look, when I was a young person and I came to Broadway in my first Broadway show, I was working for Agnes DeMille, the legendary Agnes DeMille, who at that time was in a wheelchair. This was post her stroke. So she was relying on her assistants and associates to teach her work. but she was there, she was alive, she was well, and she was very, very in charge and would stop you and tell you when you were doing something right or doing something wrong. But the period of theater in the 80s, I'm talking 1980 to 1990, dancers didn't really participate in the creation. They didn't talk with the creatives. They weren't allowed to, they weren't invited to. Mm-hmm. Theater has changed. And I just wrote an article about it for the SDC, the Society of Directors and Choreographers annual newsletter, about how human rights have crept into the theater. They have become a part of the creative process, and we are better for it. So as talking to young actors, when you're in the process of collaborating with a director or a choreographer or a musical director, you have to be smart enough to understand that you are only going to be asked at certain times to participate. Mm-hmm. You know, your opinion and your ideas are going to be welcomed by some directors and choreographers, and they're going to be shut down by others, because not everyone works the same way. I happen to be in the camp that the reason I hired you is because I want all of you in the room. Mm-hmm. I want not just your dancing body, not just your singing voice, not just your acting ability. I want your mind. I want you present. I don't want you on your phone. I don't want you texting. I don't want you messaging. I want you with me. I want the room to be the most important place in the building, and your time there to be more important than a birthday party or a friend's celebration. I want the show, the creation of the show, to be as important to you as it is to me. And I find those people. Mm-hmm. And through the process of rehearsing, I find the ones who are in it to win it. And those are the ones I ask back into the room.
It's a good lesson for all of our students that are watching this.
Absolutely. And it doesn't take much to be present, right? It's just the work and it's the dedication. It's not a crazy skill set. It's just doing the work and showing up, as Paul likes to say.
I fell asleep every day of my life in Paw, Michigan, in my little bed. And I would say my little prayers, and I'd say, please get me to Broadway. Please get me to Broadway. So when I got to Broadway, I didn't want to be anywhere else. That was the only place I wanted to be. And that enthusiasm and focus and energy, and sometimes I was too much. I know I was crazy, you know, but I was so happy and proud to be in that room that it all mattered to me. And that's my advice to young people who want to be in this business. I can smell it a mile away. I can tell if you're here or if you're somewhere else. And so please be here, be with me, because that will make the difference.
That's great advice. So if you're listening to this, rewind that and watch it or hear it again, right? Like that right there, I feel like that's amazing advice. So Paul, you've been working with us here at the wHARTon Center for over a decade now. Talk to us a little bit about how you got started with the wHARTon Center, because I know that Jerry had something to do with that. We were a little all connected there.
Well, in the beginning, when we started doing Legally Blonde and that opened, and me and Laura Bell Bundy, who was Elle Woods, became very good friends, and our out of town was in San Francisco, which is where I'm from. So I brought people out to my parents' house. My parents came in, and it was kind of this family thing that I just kind of bonded with the cast in a special way, like most casts do out of town. Laura Bell and I were being asked to do a lot of education stuff. I've always been obsessed with education because I always wished when I was a kid in California that someone from one of these tours I'd seen or a Broadway show could come into my school and teach me something. Just so obsessed. And we didn't have the internet. We had the CD fold outs of stuff. I remember looking at Once on This Island and I saw Will Rogers Follies, which Jerry was in the original Broadway company of. That's a show I could not stop thinking about and get out of my mind. The just spectacular dance numbers and the staircase that came down and all the tap dancing and stuff. I was just like on fire with something like that. So I've just always thought now that I'm on Broadway and I've been doing this, how cool it would be if we started a kind of mentoring Broadway thing where kids could learn from the best in the business, the best choreographers, directors, actors, and just learn how the business is, headshots, you know, resumes, and the work ethic that goes into it all. So Mike Brand at the wHARTon Center generously, he actually invited Laura Bell to do a donor appreciation concert. We were like best friends at the time, and she was like, do you want to come with me to Michigan and sing backup in my band? I'm doing a country Legally Blonde thing and I do these other things. I was like, yeah, I'll do whatever you want. I'm game. I'll learn all that. So I sang backup for her at this thing, and I said, let's call education people and see if kids would show up at the wHARTon Center. I'll do a dance thing, you can do an acting thing. And our music director taught a music class. I think like 150 kids showed up. They bussed in a bunch of schools, and we had this great workshop, and the kids were engaged. And on the flight back, is where Take It From the Top started. Me and Laura Bell like had this plan. We were gonna reach out to all these performing arts centers and start with the wHARTon Center. We landed, we called Mike and said, can you help us form something? Can we come back to the wHARTon and do a longer workshop? So we did a 3-day workshop, and then we did a week workshop. Then he sent us to Grand Rapids. Then he sent us to Traverse City. And I just fell in love with Michigan, and we've been doing it ever since. We're coming on this will be our 14th year. Year 15, I want a parade with live animals.
All right.
I want Aladdin style parade down
all through campus. Yes.
All through campus.
It's
Right
a
down.
lot of costumes, Paul.
We deserve it.
Well, I agree. You know, and
all of your Broadway shows.
Yes. I'll
Take it from
supply
the top.
heels.
Yeah, and it's such a special thing. You know, I've been working on it 4 years now, and it's such a great opportunity. Somebody from the Lansing area, I've known about it since the beginning. And actually, a funny story, I was at that donor concert. I worked for Jackson National Life, the insurance company, and so I got donor tickets because I worked for the company. And I remember seeing Laura Bell, and I was like, "This is amazing!" And little did I know, singing backup was Paul, and we'd be working together on all this amazing Take It From the Top content.
You know, it's so amazing. It not just for
Here it is.
Paul and Laura Bell, but for any of us, particularly this year with the pandemic, being able to continue to inspire young people and being able to connect like this through Zoom. Look, I've had a lot of time on my hands, so I've been able to talk to a lot of people, and I've been asked to talk to a lot of people. And the truth of the matter is that it's just so rewarding to know that there's so many young people out there who are as in love with musical theater and performing as I am and was at their age. So, you know, and the fans of Legally Blonde, particularly that musical, and Kinky Boots and Hairspray, those three have really sparked interest in a lot of young people, not just in the United States, around the world, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy the moment, because a lot of the kids that we even work with weren't even born yet when Legally Blonde started, and there's kind of a resurgence of that story. And honestly, it's a more powerful show, I think, for young women, the lessons that are taught in Legally Blonde, than a lot of musicals and a lot of kind of movies that are out there from the time period that the film came out. I think it's a much more empowering show for a lot of people. So I'm glad people are getting obsessed with it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, those three you mentioned, Hairspray, Kinky Boots, and Legally Blonde, they're all, that's the theme, is empowerment of somebody who's disenfranchised for whatever reason. And I love to see younger students really glom onto that and feel connected to, whether it's Lola or Tracy or Elle, you know, somebody who the world's kind of against them for whatever reason, and they get to show that strength. So that's I love seeing. I work with a lot of high schoolers and middle schoolers doing voice coaching, and seeing them really love those characters just warms my heart, because I think it does show promise for the next generation, that they're ready to welcome others into the art.
It's interesting too, quickly, with all this virtual stuff. I mean, we had 168 kids this summer at the wHARTon Center. Normally when we're there live, there's so many rehearsal spaces and rooms, and the company and all these different groups of kids, I'm running back and forth. I don't get to sit with the individual students and really get to know them. This time has been the virtual program we're doing right now. I've been able to sit with these kids and really get to know what their material is they're singing, where they're coming from, a little about their lives. It's so much more connective than a live thing, which I didn't expect. I thought I'd just be on a screen and they'd be over there and it would be so disconnected. But it's interesting how we're finding more connection through this. I can't wait till we're back live again, because that's what live theater is. Let's get on stage, let's get audiences, let's make this happen. But there's a lot of opportunities to learn and to take class and to train and to do stuff during this time that I hope everybody's taking full advantage of.
Absolutely. And to that end too, Paul, you've brought in such a wonderful, slate of Broadway performers and professionals. And this year, being on all these virtual calls, seeing such generous and warm and welcome performers come and talk to these kids. And I think that, Jerry, as you were mentioning, it's great to be able to talk to the kids and for the kids to hear from the professionals. So that's been a very special opportunity.
If I would have had that opportunity when I was a kid, well, first of all, there was no internet, so that wasn't going to happen. But if I had had that opportunity, if you had to pay for internet, our bill would have been through the roof, because I would have been on it 24/7 at home, talking, taking class. I mean, it's just amazing what is out there for young people right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, also back to Legally Blonde, that ties into virtual streaming content. Back when we were doing Legally Blonde and right before we started Kinky Boots, Jerry and I were out at Fire Island at his house, and we were constantly, there was floating around videos of his work, and Legally Blonde was a huge one that people would send in the jump rope number and say, look how good we are, we did the whole thing. And we kind of looked at it and I was like, should they be doing the whole thing? Is there a line of intellectual property rights and
are they doing it right?
Yeah. So we kind of thought about it, and we said, let's spin this around and try to create a tool that people can learn original Broadway choreography from the people who created it and learn the right way, and work with the licensing companies that they're buying the shows from and do kind of a proper, so there didn't exist anything.
This again goes back to the generational change in our technology and how we're able to access live theater. So I, as a kid, I performed in Michigan in at least 3 productions of West Side Story before I got to college. Once I was in college, I did another production of West Side Story. And then once I got to New York, I ended up assisting Jerry Robbins, who created West Side Story, and learning the show from the original creator. So all of those versions I had done before, which were pieces and parts of Jerry's work, but not the story behind the work, and never the authentic work, I finally learned all of those years later. And I thought to myself, if there was a way for me to share the knowledge with young people of Legally Blonde, not just the steps, but the story behind the steps and why I chose those steps and what I was trying to do with the storytelling with those steps. Not just myself as a choreographer, Sergio Trujillo as a choreographer, every choreographer I could get my hands on who wanted to share their original work on a platform. Paul and I started going after them and saying, this is an opportunity to be a collaborator with these schools who are going to do your stuff anyway, right? Yeah. So you can help them and make sure they do it right. And that connection to young people, I think, is really, not only are we sharing and educating, but we're planting seeds for what's to come.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And this is called
all ephemeral. It comes and goes. And if you don't cultivate it, it will die off. So we need to be the cultivators, right? We have the opportunity to help cultivate the next generation.
Absolutely. And your program's called The Original Production.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Yeah, and you know, as somebody who's worked in and around high school shows and community theater and small regional, I've been in shows where the choreographer has said, well, I got it from the DVD and we're going to do it this way. And I'm thinking, but that has no connection to our cast, to the way we're telling this story. And so I think the opportunity, and I love that you go into the storytelling behind the choreography, because that's what makes a great choreographer. Is they're not just doing a dance recital to some musical theater, you know, music. They're really storytelling through dance. And I think teaching that to up and coming choreographers is such a great skill. You know, I, like I said, worked with so many kind of budding choreographers that have a dance studio background, and they know the moves, but they're not tying it into a story. So to hear people at the top of their game kind of say, this is the storytelling that I want to do with these steps, I think that it's such an amazing opportunity.
I'll never forget when I was working with Jerry Robbins. I was assisting him, and we were working on the Jerome Robbins Broadway, the musical, which was a compilation of all of his work. And I was in charge of several different shows and several different types of choreography. So I was working on something from Fiddler, and I was working on something from West Side Story this particular day. And I got to a turn in West Side Story, and I was putting my leg in a passe position and turning like a ballet dancer. And he said, "What are you doing?" He looked at me like I was nuts. "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm turning." He said, "Well, that's not how a shark or a jet turns. These kids are in the street. Drag your foot on the floor behind the other foot. Don't be a ballet dancer, be a gang member." So he was trying to use his movement as text, right? A choreographer is a writer of a story in dance. And the moves are your written word, they're your text. That's how you're telling that story. And it was a lesson I just remember going, wow. And if you think about it, come on, does anybody in Fiddler on the Roof move like anybody in West Side Story? I don't think so, thank God. That was his brilliance. He gave the moves to the character, not to himself, and saying, this is Jerry Robbins, and he was brilliant at it. And he was funny, and he was just the very, very best there is.
Jerome Robbins is also a perfect example of how technology has changed through the ages, and we as theater people need to kind of flow with it to improve our artistry. He had so many ballets that were written out in lab notation, and I'd always heard of lab notation.
Lab notation.
Lab notation, yeah.
Yeah.
It's evolved into wrongness. I can't speak in quarantine, but words escape me completely. Not working.
All did the video.
Yes. But it's so tricky to read because it was made for ballet dancers, and how the dance can, the relationship of music and dance. So this sign meant this arm moved on this note. And it was all written in at the New York City Public Library, there's the books and books and books of all of this choreography that pairs with this music. Now we have video, and we have technology, and we have sign up on this platform for streaming stuff that you don't have to download illegally. You can watch people move their bodies. I think dance can be passed down to generation in such a more valuable way, like what we're doing. And whether people use it or not.
The ballet companies used film and video to teach long before Broadway did, or live theater did. Live theater is coming on board, and it was Jerry Robbins, quite honestly, that when I was working with him on Jerome Robbins Broadway, was just starting to come into the framework of a rehearsal where you could actually videotape the rehearsal to have an archival use of it. And he said to me at the end of Jerome Robbins, when it opened, because we had to go and find all of this old choreography. And if it hadn't been recorded, he couldn't remember it. We were calling Nanette Fabre, we were calling, Comden and Green, we were calling these people back into the rehearsal room to try and spark his imagination. But it was the video footage that we found that did it for him. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, he said, the first thing I want you to do with your next paycheck is buy a video camera. Mm-hmm. And every time you choreograph something, videotape it so you have a record of it. He said, because you will forget it.
Yeah.
Said the only way you'll be able to remember it is if you have a video recording of it. So record everything you do. It's your choreography, it's your property, record it.
Yeah.
It's great advice.
And I also say to schools that use the original production, whether you use the steps or not, a step is a step, but I think if you're a director, if you're a teacher, if you're a choreographer, if you're an aspiring performer or artist of any kind, learning as much as you can about these shows we're doing, all the backstory. Jerry talks a lot in the Hairspray one about how he researched the 60s and what trends were and the things he looked at specifically, that him and Jack O'Brien, the director, worked together to research the look and the vibe of the show.
Part of that was, you know, we were when we were creating Hairspray, John Waters, who wrote the original, said to me, he said, I asked him, you know, is there anything you want me to, he said, I want the moves to be authentic and be before 1963 when Kennedy was shot. He said, America was innocent. And if you go back and research the kind of choreography, the kind of dances kids were doing back then, you'll see the innocence in the dance. And it was true. And so I researched, I was born in 60, so I had to go back and research 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, and look at the kind of choreography that was on film. I went to the Museum of Television and looked at a lot of stuff. And then I met two of the original people who danced on the Buddy Dean show, who came to New York and taught me the stuff from the show through John. So I'm always looking to make it as authentic as possible, right? And to speak, particularly if it's in a period, but yet make it relatable for people today. So this is part of what Paul and I were trying to do with the original production, was share that information with these young people who are creating our shows about how the show gets created in the first place. I mean, Legally Blonde, Larry and Nell must have written 9 songs that ended up being cut from the musical and changed into other songs. Cindy probably wrote a half a dozen songs that got cut from Kinky Boots and got reworked for the characters because they weren't quite the right song. And, you know, this is the process of creating a new musical.
Yeah, I think it's very valuable for people that are in this industry to learn from the people, from where it all started. However you use that information to create your own version of the show, I think you need to start with the show itself and how the show started authentically, and the integrity that the creators and cast kind of put into it.
Absolutely.
Education, if nothing else.
I always tell the young people, this might be helpful for young kids who are in the business or want to be in the business. If you're called in for an audition, you have to look at the material. If you're going in for a character, let's say you're being called in for Elle Woods, you know, it would be smart of you to do a little research if you don't know, for God knows what reason. If you don't know the character, watch the movie, read the original book, read the original script, look at some of the original pictures. So when you go in, you give an essence of that character, so the audience knows, and the people who are casting know you've done your work. Right? Don't go in your sweatpants looking like, oh, I just showed up for the audition because I had to come because my agent set it up. No, show that you made an effort to try and portray the character in your audition. It's important, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I have found so enjoyable for me, kind of, and Jerry running original production, because of him and his Tony Awards and reputation, he's opened up so many doors for me to get to know all these other choreographers and creators that I didn't get to work with in my career, like Matt West, who is the original choreographer of Beauty and the Beast. He has so many stories that I've never heard of, how Disney Theatrics was formed and how Beauty and the Beast was the first Broadway musical that Disney decided to put on a Broadway stage. And I think those stories are so fascinating because he pitched the ideas to, let's not have these crazy big costumes, let's make this number more fabulous, let's do this, and just seeing his work. And then he went out and bought all these props to make it look like what he used in the stage. I'm like, I don't know these numbers, I wasn't in it, this is your thing, we're here to support your vision, tell the people what you want. And I became my little kid performer self, learning all this fun stuff. So it's been a cool journey for me to dive into other shows and productions and get to know other creatives. It's valuable also for everybody doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love hearing that thread of, you know, relationships and connections, and it's no man is an island unto himself in the world of theater, right? Like you do not succeed alone. You cultivate this network of people that you trust and respect and learn from. And, you know, Paul having a quite a career behind you, still wanting to learn from the people ahead of you. I think that's a great testament to this never ending cycle of learning from those who are working and then passing it on to the next generation.
Yeah.
It's what I always tell my students as well. This no one is an island, and this island is very small, and everybody knows everybody. So you need to be respectful and be kind and be positive and not start a bad reputation for yourself, because it goes around very quickly.
Yes.
And everybody hears everything. You have to be a good person first, then dance, then sing, then act, do your business. But let's start with who you are as a human. It's for the world in general, not just for performers.
I think that's just good advice for being a good human. So,
Yeah.
So looking forward now, so Jerry, tell us a little bit about Pretty Woman, why you think people should come see it, what it was like creating that show.
Well, first of all, I think it's a great, fun, and beautifully romantic musical. I saw the show when it first came out as a movie, and I remember specifically saying to myself at that point, this would make a great musical because it's the perfect Cinderella story. You know, we've come a long way since Pretty Woman, but we still have, you know, we still live in a world where women, but also men, find themselves in situations that they're not proud of, situations where they wish they could get out, but they don't know how. And you know, I thought that story of her, she's a prostitute in the story, but so is, you know, Sweet Charity. It's about a girl who's in a bad place and she's dreaming of getting out of that place. It's the Cinderella in the ashes moment. And she meets a prince, but she ends up not going with the prince until she goes with him when she goes on her own terms, and she has created who she wants to be and decided how she's going to get that. And that was the story that drew me to it. Paula Wagner, brilliant female producer, produced all of the Mission Impossibles with Tom Cruise, basically handled Tom Cruise from Risky Business through Mission Impossible. Paula was the one who brought Gary Marshall and J.F. Lawton together to make the musical happen. And once I got on board, we collectively looked for a songwriting team, and we wound up with Bryan Adams and Jim Balance, who wrote the score. It's a fantastic score. And we started working on the musical, and it was wonderful. It just had opened 2 weeks prior to this pandemic world shutdown in London. And it was a huge success in London, 5 stars across the board, and sold out for 1 year. And now it is everything, the costumes, the sets, everything's in the theater sitting, waiting for us to come back, which hopefully will happen not too far from now. But yeah, we're supposed to go into rehearsal for the national tour at the end of summer. And then, and I also have a national tour of Hairspray going back out at the end of summer. So hopefully Broadway will start coming back.
Absolutely. So those of us who know the movie but haven't yet seen the musical, what's different? Are there any changes, any updates? What's new about it?
What's different? Well, it's a musical, right? So there's songs, the characters sing songs. That's what's always different from the original movie that gets turned into a Broadway musical, is there's a score that the characters actually get to express themselves and sing. The character of the hotel manager, Mr. Thompson, always seemed like a fairy godfather kind of character to me. So I've expanded him quite a bit, and he sings, he dances, and there's a lot of fun there. The elevator boy, Julio, has been expanded, and Kit DeLuca, her best friend, has a little bit more of an arc in our story. And
there's a beautiful, when they go on he takes her to San Francisco to the opera. Jerry has made the most beautifully staged opera romantic number that's
just loved.
Beautiful.
I love that idea, watching that section in film. And I thought, how do I make that cinematic on stage? And I asked Brian to write me a love song. And I said, imagine them sitting in the opera box and she's watching the opera and Edward is watching her watch the opera. And what would he say? What would he say about seeing her fall in love with something that he loves? And so I created that, them going to the opera, them watching the opera, them ending up in bed together that night, all in one musical. It has parts of La Boheme in it, but it also, I mean La Traviata in it, but it also has this original song that Brian wrote, and it's a beautiful moment. I really enjoyed doing it.
Amazing.
And a beautiful design by David Rockwell, and costumes by Greg Barnes, and lighting by Ken Posner, Philip. It's stunning. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. Good.
So tell me a little bit about what you've both been doing. This is something I like to ask all of our creatives in these interviews. What have you been doing during the pandemic, during the quarantine? I mean, Paul, I know you've been working a lot with us. We talk, I feel like daily almost, but what else have you been doing during the shutdown to kind of stay artistically fulfilled, to keep working? What have you been up to?
Well, because of original production, luckily we created streaming content. So we're trying to push, we have a subscription model where people can learn choreography monthly and get new combinations and stuff. But because of those relationships that we built with the licensing companies, I'm working with MTI, which is kind of one of the bigger licensing companies that has all of Jerry's shows and Disney shows and stuff. They've hired me to do some editing work for them, which is amazing for me right now. Staying busy with Take It From the Top. And luckily, a lot of people are believing in us to bring them content and streaming stuff. And a lot of the artists are just simply available. So I can kind of get my pick of the litter and have people do fun stuff. But I'm trying to stay in shape. I'm trying to stretch. I'm trying to, eat healthy and do the normal things. I think when the pandemic started, we all were just like, at a loss, and now we're trying to come back together and get ourselves back together. And Jerry actually said in the whARTon at Home that we did, this whole thing about being prepared no matter what, because this is all going to come back at some point and we need to be ready. So what are we doing now to get ready? And I've just been learning. I'm learning how to edit. I've created a whole production studio between Jacob Yandura and me. He does all this sound design and orchestration and stuff. And I've been doing video production and learning, taking every opportunity to learn as much as I can.
What have I been doing? Okay, so first of all, I have two brothers who live in Paw still, and all of my nieces and nephews, and they're all there. There's quite a big number of them. And I think the pandemic hit obviously much harder and much faster in New York City than it did in Michigan. So when it hit, we really had to quarantine. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had to mask up and we had to quarantine, or else you were going to get COVID. There was no question about it. So I came out here to my house and I pretty much locked myself in the house for the entire summer. So the first thing I did was clean the house. The second thing I did was refinish a lamp. And then the third thing I did was started preparing for Broadway Bears, my annual benefit show that I do for Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, which we had to do virtually last year. And it looks like we'll do another virtual one this year. So that we were able to raise $1 million for Broadway Cares with that show, $600,000 with the show and $400,000 with the strip-a-thon. So $1 million total, which was just sensational.
Wow.
And I went into lockdown. I will never forget it because it was March 13th. It was a Friday the 13th. 2020, and it was in March, and I was in the room doing a 2-week reading of my newest musical, Becoming Nancy, and we were reading the rewrites, and we were supposed to have a room full of people who were there to see the reading, and they couldn't come. We social distance and we videotaped the reading. So we're going to have to go back to that process. So I've been working with those writers on that version that we'll do eventually when we're able to do it again. And I've been developing a couple of other projects with writers. So it's been a really great time. Even though we can't write in person, we've gotten used to this Zooming, and we've been writing online. And so we've really moved the ball forward with those projects. I'm very excited about them. And yeah, they're future musicals.
Yeah. That's great. And I think, you know, I've been hearing from a lot of people that while nobody ever wanted, you know, theater to come to a screeching halt like this, there have been some opportunities to slow down, to refocus our work, to learn new things. And hearing that from both of you, I think that's pretty universal at this point.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're all waiting with bated breath to get theater back on the stage and to be in the room. And I do believe that you know, general populations are starting to feel this lack of live arts, and hopefully they understand the performance, that those of us that work in it, you know, it's our lifeblood, of course, but you know, the not being able to go to concerts and shows and anything where this kind of base of human connection has been such a lacking, that I'm really hoping that people are as hungry as we are for it to come back and ready to experience it.
Yeah. It's really something about how it has really made you realize how fortunate we are, and how and the abundance of opportunity and proximity to each other and to the arts that has been something we've taken for granted for many, many, many years. And you know, I'm hoping that this time has given us all a chance to reflect on not only when we get back, how we'll be able to get back, but how we'll be able to make it better and more inclusive for everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, speaking of how lucky we are, I am just so very grateful that you both took out some time of your day to talk to us, to talk to our whARTon audiences. You know, Paul, we are very, very grateful for your continued partnership. Take It From the Top is something that is so special to me and to our entire whARTon audience. And Jerry, you know, having you speak with some of our students earlier last summer, it's just such a great opportunity. So we are very, very thankful for both of you, and can't wait to see what comes next from you, Jerry. We can't wait to have Pretty Woman and get to experience that live on stage, and you know, just wish the best for both of you. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. And I just want to thank the whARTon Center for being such a strong cultural kind of like center of Michigan. I just think the community is so lucky to have a performing arts center that from the president and every employee believes in what they're doing, and they keep their audiences safe, and they care about the cultural kind of temperature of the community, which doesn't always happen in every community. And Michigan's lucky to have the whARTon Center.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to see you, Jerry Mitchell.
You too, Paulie.
Once again, a big thank you to Paul Canaan and Jerry Mitchell for joining me today on this whARTon at Home Connection interview. And as always, a sincere thank you to MSU Federal Credit Union for their continued support of this series and of whARTon Center in general. As we look ahead, we hope that we will be opening sooner rather than later, but just remember to stay connected with us online as we continue to offer content until we can all be together in person again. Thanks.